Are recording. So welcome, Tom Fleury and Brian Noe.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tom.
Today's guest is Mr. Brian Noe. Let me formally introduce him. With over 35 years of life experience in the world of wealth advising, economics, business, and raising a family, Brian brings the experience and integrity that is expected for and by the people we work with. Brian has previously held positions as a vice president of a multi-million-dollar business, a contract negotiator, a pricing estimator for billion-dollar projects, a corporate liaison between the company and a government customer, and a consultant to business owners and government entities. In addition, Brian has over 20 years of experience as an adjunct professor of economics, bringing an education perspective to the conversation. And he also has been a speaker at industry conventions. As a pilot and former volunteer firefighter, Brian learned how to anticipate expected and unexpected developments and how to have a system of redundancies to deal with adversity and take advantage of opportunity. Some of Brian's other activities include bike riding, the beach, camping, hiking, and birding after enjoying many years of coaching youth baseball and soccer. He also served as the town treasurer and chairman of the board of finance. Brian, welcome.
All right, thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Appreciate it. Welcome to this conversation. Today's topic is animal spirits and making better economic decisions. So I guess the first question on the table is, what are animal spirits?
Well, Tom, animal spirits goes back to our biological days when we had basic instincts to fight, flight, or freeze. And this served us very well as hunter-gatherers. However, our animal spirits are not so good when we're making decisions and thinking about things that do not have an immediate or urgent deadline. For example, think back in the day if you were being chased by a saber-toothed cat, that would get you running. There would be a lot of urgency. There would be an immediate decision, and some people would run away, flight. Some people would freeze, maybe not a good situation. And some people would try to fight the cat, and it worked well. However, when we're thinking about decisions about our finances, about our wealth, about our businesses, about our families, the sense of urgency may not be there. And therefore, it's too easy to let our animal spirits conflict, get in the way, and basically run away from making decisions, freeze instead of making decisions, or maybe even fight decisions.
Interesting.
Right? They need to be made. And I think we've all heard this before, and I think we've all used this excuse, gee, I really need to deal with this, but I'm way too busy.
So how does this animal spirits concept get sort of into the economic conversation of today?
It goes back to the 1920s and 30s. John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist of his day in Keynesian economics, first introduced the term animal spirits and how it disrupts the assumption of rational decision-making. The economist George Akerlof of UC Berkeley and Robert Schiller of Yale then came up with a book on animal spirits and go into greater depth on how animal spirits, again, contradicts rational decision-making. And what they define the animal spirits is the spontaneous urge to action rather than inaction, and not as an outcome of the weighted average of quantitative benefits. So to break it down, the spontaneous urge to action really kind of defines all decision-making as emotional. So that's the first part of it. Now, the weighted average is to take economic data and put a weight on what that data gives us, because we have to assume that all data can be inaccurate. So we want multiple data sources. We want to weight what we think are the better sources, and that helps us come down to making a decision. What we try to avoid, when we're working with people, is how to understand the limitations of the data, how to understand the source of the information that we're using, and try to avoid blindly following one set of data or just rejecting one set of data. And then that's how we make our decisions. We really want the quantitative benefits. And that gets into the inductive versus deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is when we're biased to a belief and we only accept or seek out information that backs up that belief. where deductive reasoning is based on facts and figures. So we try to keep an open mind. Here's some facts, here's some figures. What are we going to do with it?
That inductive and deductive reasoning could get us down a political tangent, but let's not go there.
It can, but you know what? It transcends all aspects of our lives and all aspects of our decision making. And it's really, I think, the number one human conflict is, are we using our inductive reasoning or are we using deductive reasoning? And I think what we find is people who use deductive reasoning tend to have more advisors, they tend to have more of an open mind, and they tend to be happier.
Interesting. Cool. So what are some of the signs that animal spirits are starting to affect and become part of our decision-making process?
It starts with confidence in the sense of people becoming overconfident, and then this confidence builds upon itself. And then you'll hear people saying things like, I don't know, you better be careful. This seems a little risky. Oh, no. This is going to be great. I've got it. This is awesome. Overconfidence can create a problem. Lack of confidence can also create a problem. If we start losing our confidence, and there's people around us who are helping us lose our confidence, it gets easier not to make decisions or to make decisions that will actually turn out and hurt us, because we're not really thinking clearly, because we're not really confident in anything that we're doing. So that is without a doubt number one. Fairness is another animal spirit that gets very interesting. Things happen, and they're not always fair. And the next thing you know, we're saying things like, "Oh, that wasn't fair. That wasn't fair. How did that happen to me?" Well, you're right. It probably wasn't fair, but the fact of the matter is we still have to deal with it, and we're still responsible to deal with it. And again, if we hear ourselves saying this isn't fair, that's okay to vent, but it really shouldn't be a decision-making point about whether it's fair or not.
Good point.
Corruption is a real bad animal spirit, and people just get, corrupt, and it's just bad faith. And I think we deal with it daily with people around us, and it's important to cut those people out of our lives. We also have to be careful too, because it's all around us every day, and the media likes to exploit it. So we have to be careful not to let corruption creep into our decision-making process and allow our animal spirits to jump on the corruption. The corruption becomes a decision-making point when it just shouldn't be there. That just doesn't make sense. Money illusion is another animal spirit that takes over for people. And we tend to mature in a specific economic cycle. I remember my parents, they matured during the Depression and post-World War II. So even in the 1980s and 90s, listening to my father speak, he spoke like it was still the 40s or the 50s. Right? That was his time frame for everything. And we all have that. And then the money illusion gets us stuck out of our life cycles. So we all have different life cycles, and they're not necessarily based on age. We may start businesses at different ages. We may sell our businesses at different ages. We may retire at different ages. We may start second careers at different ages. So I think we have to be careful that our life cycles and the economic cycles and our money illusions are all separate and well-defined. And that's an area where people get into problems with their animal spirits. There's also a very big issue today, I think, when it comes down to money illusion with paper money being our investments, credit cards, debit cards. I think it's a lot easier to spend more money when you're using a piece of plastic than it is when you're counting out the bills, right? I think this creates some money illusion. I hear people say things like, well, that's paper losses and paper gains. And it gets a little bit illusionary because, let's say, for instance, you lost some money in an investment. Well, that's okay. It's a piece of paper. But I think if you had a pile of money on the table and that money suddenly disappeared, I think you'd have a different response to that.
How true? How true?
So money illusion is an issue, and the illusion continues over into a lot of government programs, as far as what are we receiving for benefits, what are we paying to support those benefits, and it's a very difficult area that we're not going to get into today. But I think it's something that we really owe it to ourselves to try to eliminate the illusion and really look at the bottom line. What are the numbers telling us? Stories then wrap up the animal spirits when it comes to our economic, decision making. And we always hear things like housing prices will never fail, right? They'll never fall. I think we now know that's not true anymore. But in the 80s and 90s, when I was growing up, that's all I heard. Buy real estate, housing prices never fall. They do. Stock markets can only go up. Well, if you live in Japan, the stock market hasn't gone up since 1990.
Yeah.
Right. It's been up and down, but it hasn't gone up for 27 years. Well, if you retired at 65 years old and you're waiting for the stock market to recover, you are now 92. Right. Not really working. Markets are always efficient. They're not. Markets become inefficient, and then when they become inefficient, we have imbalances, and those imbalances create bigger reactions. 2008 and 2009 was a significant reaction to markets that clearly were not efficient. Right? The markets corrected themselves, and when they correct themselves, it's very painful. Right? But the markets will correct themselves after a series of being inefficient. And we have to be aware of the fact that these cycles, the economic cycles, include market inefficiencies. That can be an opportunity, it can be adversity, it depends what side of the track you're standing on.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of people don't realize that, and that's interesting, all these sort of illusions. So what are some of the signs that these animal spirits are really starting to either affect or take over my business's decision-making processes?
Right. I think the number one sign to me is when people pull out their flamethrower. Right. Things aren't going the way I expected them to go, and it's somebody else's fault. And I think it's true. Right. It probably is somebody else's fault. It may be your customers, it may be your employees, it may be the politicians, it could be your family, it could be the dog, it could be people on the road. And what happens is if we're busy blaming other people, even if it's accurate, it really doesn't do us any good as far as what we're going to do with it, because again, we're still responsible for what comes our way, regardless of whose fault it is.
Wow, unbelievable. It seems like today the media is really, what's the best way to say it, stirring the pot, actually being the flamethrower. And it's negatively impacting people's ability to even manage their animal spirits and make decisions based on sound information and deductive reasoning. What do we need to do to deal with that?
That is a great point. The first thing we need to realize is that the delivery of information is tied to advertisers and programming. Right?
Good point. True. Yeah.
And it always has been. There's nothing nefarious about the last couple decades of news being tied to commercials, and it's gone back in time. But I think the real problem with the noise coming out of the media and the distraction is how does that make us feel? And I think sometimes the media is designed to make us feel hopeless, maybe angry, anxious, depressed, vengeful. I hear people who are overly enthusiastic and confident. And I think what it really comes down to is we have to ask ourselves the decision. We have to ask ourselves the question, is it worth watching or reading what it is we're watching and reading? And I think that's the number one issue. What is it doing for us? When I watch a show, I always like to look at the commercials. And I watch the commercials, and I will literally say to myself, I don't think I'm this demographic. Should I be watching this show? So, because the commercials have nothing to do with my interest, yet the show might. So I think that is, it's just really important for us to really either disconnect from the media, or if we are watching the media, watch it from afar. Let's put our arm out and make it a media that we're watching, but we're not tied to their outcomes.
I guess I agree with you because I tend to do the same thing. I will turn something off. But for those people who are either feeling anxious or a sense of hopelessness or are really affected by what they see, how do you deal with that? How do people deal with that? Or how should they deal with that?
Well, I think given that there is just so much news out there and we're getting bombarded so hard with it, how do we make a decision? Right? And that really comes down to to how are we going to handle this? We think back in time, go back to the day when cigarette advertisers used to advertise cigarettes as a healthy product. Right? It'll make you healthy and you'll feel great. Will be great when you're smoking. Another campaign, and I just got married this past June 24th, but I found out that the diamond engagement ring wasn't really a tradition until 1947, when an advertising campaign started with, a diamond is forever. And so it was an advertising campaign that got that tradition going, and it's a great tradition. There's nothing wrong with it. But I think understanding where our news comes from and how to use it is really step number one, instead of blindly seeking it out or blindly accepting it as truth.
I love the Beers diamond. That was just a great marketing ploy.
Right.
So, do you see any paradigm shifts between inductive and deductive reasoning? Do you see people going one way or another using these tools, whether they know them or not, explicitly in their ability to make decisions?
People can, and I think we do see that. So I think the first step is to determine what type of news and information you need to make a decision, and making sure that there's different viewpoints and different perspectives, right? A good sign is reacting to the show by saying, I want to learn more about that. That's interesting. That's a good sign. When you find yourself watching a show and then responding again with anger or hopelessness or vengeance or I cannot believe these people are so stupid, well, you have to ask yourself, why am I watching this?
Yep.
It's getting me all worked up one way or the other, but it's not helping me make a decision. So like I said, I think when we hear ourselves saying, that's really interesting, I want to learn more, that's a good place to be. That means your mind is open and you're being objective.
That's great for television, maybe even radio. And I know we talked earlier. What about the internet? What can people do because they're so influenced by what's out on the internet?
I think getting right down to who you want to follow is important. It's so easy to share information today, and I think it's easy to get a post from Tom Fleury and say, well, I know Tom, I like Tom, so if he sent me a post, this must be right on. Mm-hmm. But it may not be, right? May be good for Tom and maybe something that fits what Tom's doing, but it may have nothing to do with me, right? So I need to go past a friend source and go right to the source of the actual information to determine if it's something that's useful for me. And is it something I want to react to? Is it something that I want to consider when making a decision?
Interesting. I know you can't give specific advice on particular situations, but as obviously and I know as being interested in economics, there's a lot of changes going on out there, especially today. What's happening now that you believe is likely going to affect someone like me or someone who has a small business today?
Well, I think the short answer is everything and nothing. So, because it really depends on who you are and how you react to things, right? I think the first thing is to ask the question: is there something going on in the economy or within government policy, which is economic based, that is going to directly impact me or indirectly impact me? I think that's the first question. And that's up to you. So there may be a new law. Interest rates may go up or down. The stock market may go up or down. Does that directly impact me? If you don't own any stocks, does it really matter to you what happens to the stock market? I would say probably not. That's an indirect effect at best. So if you don't own stock and you watch the stock market indices every day, why do you do that? It's a question to ask yourself. So I think step number one is, what will directly impact me? And I think that's where you start.
Okay.
Following that type of information.
I have sort of another question. And this is probably loaded, but interest rates are now low, and word on the street is there's only one way for them to go, which is up. And maybe you can't shed too much light on this because it's an opinion, but just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, interest rates can obviously go up or down. So, what are you supposed to do? I think what it comes down to is, how do interest rates impact you? So let's take a step back and take a look at Japan again. Now, Japan was the second largest economy in the world in the 1990s. Their stock market fell apart in 1990. It has only recovered to 50% of its peak. But in Japan, interest rates have been very low since the 1990s. And at one point in time, interest rates in Japan were negative. If you had money in a bank account in Japan, you actually paid them a negative interest rate. So mathematically, interest rates can still go down, right? Even in a lot of Europe, 2, 3, 4 years ago, a lot of treasury rates, or the equivalent of treasury rates, the bond rates in Europe, were actually negative. So we can go lower, but we can go higher. I think what it comes down to is, do you have a lot of money in savings? A higher interest rate may make you happy. Do you have a lot of debt, or do you plan on carrying debt? It will not make you happy. And I think that's how you respond to that. And you set yourself up for not only what if interest rates are going to increase, but you also have to set yourself up for, well, what if interest rates stay the same, or what if they decrease? Because that's still a possibility.
Good point. We've got a couple questions out that have been posted, so I'm going to read one to you now. And it goes as follows. As a business leader, how do you know you're making the right decision before you make it?
Well, I don't know if you make the right decision before you make it. And that becomes the issue. And so I think, instead of making your world a heads tails, did I make the right decision, yes or no? How about to the degree that you make the right decision, right? So a decision is made. If you work it out with your advisors and you have several people vetting what it is you're getting ready to do, your probability of success should be higher, right? Especially if you have advisors who are willing to challenge you and have a different perspective. So if we increase the probability of success, let's move forward and monitor when you're implementing your plan and find out, how successful have you been? Are we 20% successful, 50% successful, 100% successful, 150% successful? I think when we put things in terms of probability of success and then measure how close we came to that probability, it's easier to make a decision, because we're not either all in or all out. It's not, we won, we lost. It's a matter of, how much of this did we get?
Like that answer. Good point. I subscribe to that theory wholeheartedly.
Right.
Second question out here is, how will the suggested global isolationism affecting our economy? Are you concerned with it? It's out there. It's probably more than perception. What's your opinion on this so-called isolationism stance that, at least the United States is taking? And not only the United States, it's Great Britain and other countries as well, where they're sort of looking in instead of looking out.
Yeah, we had the isolationism and the trade wars following the 1929 stock market crash, and we all know what happened in the 1930s. It was not a good result. That said, a little isolationism may be okay, but again, it depends on who you are and is it going to directly impact you, right? I think right now the world has become such a global economy that the horses are out of the barn. We're not isolationists anymore. I think maybe in the short run we can fight it. I think in the short run we can become more isolationist, but I think it's more of an aberration than it will be a trend. I just don't know how you keep the human population from interacting with each other.
Good point. The world is such a tiny place.
Right. Well, with 7 billion people now, it's a lot tinier than it was 100 years ago when there was only 3 billion people.
Yeah, and like I remember when I was a kid calling my grandfather in Florida going, wow, how could you possibly do that? You're so far away. And now with what the instruments and technology we're on right now, I've talked to people all over the world as if they were sitting right next to me. It's just absolutely amazing. So I agree with you. That I think that's a good point. It's going to be hard to avoid.
Right.
So sort of wrap this up. I've got sort of one final question here, and I actually wrote this down because it's a little bit long, so let me read it for you. How can we become better at using more objective, deductive reasoning, avoid fake news that's out there, and develop a sort of a cache of options to deal with change, especially, as you mentioned before, some of the things and changes we can't control? How can we do that?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's a great foundation for any sort of business leader or executive or even planning for your own family and how to make things work for you and make it easy. And I think that the number one place to start is with people, because people make the world go round. We can hide behind our computer screens and run data analytics and read nice, safe, news and make ourselves feel good or bad or whatever it is we're looking to do. But if we bring good people, good objective people into our life, and we allow them to work with us and challenge us in a constructive way, we're almost forced to keep an open mind. And now we're getting different perspectives. And now we're addressing areas that make us uncomfortable. And using this process, I really think it allows us to tame our animal spirits, because animal spirits are really easy to take over when you're working in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. But when you have people around you, good people will keep you from using your animal spirits in a destructive manner. Before we
close, another question a couple more questions came through, and this is actually a very interesting one. And I'll quote, "It seems that an effective way to make decisions is to combine deductive and inductive reasoning." Comments on that statement?
I'm not sure what the context is on that question, so I'll give it a shot. I think the thing with inductive reasoning, perhaps that question is coming from the perspective of, in my heart, I'm really excited about this plan. I'm excited about this business. I'm excited about, whatever it is I'm going to be using as a strategy. So I think what happens there is, if that inductive reasoning is who you are, I do think it's important that your personality and what you're doing around you fits. You want to have a nice, comfortable lifestyle. You want a nice, comfortable business plan. You don't want to be getting up every morning fighting the system. You don't want to get up every morning fighting what you're trying to do. It's really nice when everybody is basically, pushing the boat in the same direction, right? So I think from that perspective, inductive is okay if it's a matter of I want my world to fit around my personality and around my philosophy. But I still think we have to be careful, because most of our decision making, how are we going to implement our strategy? How are we going to fit ourselves into a world where we're comfortable and happy, still requires far more deductive reasoning.
Interesting.
Right? And I think it gets down to, successful people are just surrounded by advisors. And that might be wealth managers, it might be attorneys, it might be your accountants, it might be your tax people, but it's also your medical doctors. It might be the bartender down at the local bar. It could be a spouse. It could be, just a trusted friend. But surrounding yourself with good people, I think will allow you to have the right mix of the deductive and inductive reasoning to make you happy.
Cool. I got another question out here, and because of the Securities and Exchange Commission oversight. You probably can't answer this directly, but the question actually goes into something broader. So let me read it exactly so you can get its context. This is from one of the members of Network and Golf. They own a company with over 500 employees. And they work internationally and do a lot of business with China. The question that they're asking that I know you can't ask is, what do you predict? I know it's only a prediction, but a better question which they added was, what should this person be watching before changing up his international relationships?
That is a great question, because so many people can basically just transfer the words and still come down to the same bottom line. What am I going to do when I'm trying to predict what's going to happen?
Yep.
And I think, again, I go back to being a pilot, I go back to being a volunteer firefighter, I go back to being an economist, is let's not predict one outcome. Let's consider several outcomes. And let's come up with a plan depending on which outcome hits us. So I'll give you an example. I am flying a plane. When I left, the prediction for the weather was a beautiful sunny day. No turbulence, minimal winds, everything's great. I'm flying along and I see a thunderhead starting to form right in front of where I want to go. Well, I have my maps, I did my pre-plan, so I know if something's going to happen, I have my checklist of what I'm going to do. I'm going to change course. Maybe I turn around. Maybe I land and wait it out. Maybe I radio the tower and ask for some assistance. Because I already have a plan of action, given potential adversity, it's very easy to flip a switch and implement a change. And I think that's where deductive reasoning is very, very important for us. So instead of saying, well, this is the only outcome that we're going to have, or I bet this is the only way it's going to go, I think it forces us to open our minds and be deductive, and we think, what are all the different ways this can work? And then we take the different developments that can develop, and then we come up with a plan to deal with it.
Good answer, because from a small business perspective, as someone representing Small Business USA, my job with people is to poke holes in their plans for the what ifs, because as you just said, if it's sunny when I took off and it's predicted to be sunny, I expect it to be sunny when I land. But as you and I both know, along the way, stuff happens, and I'll use that term loosely. So appreciate that comment, and that's probably a very appropriate answer to whether it's China or Europe or Australia, whoever you're doing business with. It could be your next door neighbor down the street. You need to take that into consideration to look at all potential outcomes before you move forward.
Yep, right. Agreed 100%. And another example. So my new wife and I are going to be taking a honeymoon down in the Caribbean. We're doing a delayed honeymoon in January because we live in Connecticut, and we figured 2 weeks of 80-degree weather isn't such a bad thing. But we're flying into Puerto Rico, where we're departing on our cruise 2 days earlier. Why? There might be a snow or ice storm. The planes may not take off. And why cut it close and give yourself a 2-hour, connection from the time the plane lands to the time you get on the boat? So we're going down 2 days early just to make sure we have extra time in the event of adverse weather. That's just part of planning. If our plane takes off as scheduled and we get to Puerto Rico and we have 2 extra days in the sun and fun, we're okay with that. But if we get delayed a day, at least we're going to show up for our trip and we'll have a smile on our face because we're not stressed out. We didn't miss the boat. We don't have to fly ahead and jump on the boat in a different port. We just eliminate a lot of aggravation by basically flying out 2 days early.
That's great. So in closing, any final comments you want to share with us?
I think, again, it comes down to the happiest people are surrounded by good people. And it's a lesson I learned. It took me a long time to figure it out, but you know what? This person doesn't really give me a lot of good advice. If anything, this person gets me more riled up than they do calming me down and giving me a solution. And maybe I shouldn't be calling this person anymore to ask them what they think about something. On the other hand, being open-minded enough to allow people to say, what are you doing here? Why are you doing this? Is important. Because that's how we get questioned, and that's how, as long as it's constructive and positive. In other words, the criticism is meant to get you a better result. And those are the type of people you like to have, close at hand. people who really care about you and people who are really looking to help you make better decisions. And I think that's what it comes down to. We can increase our probability of success, right? We can take the time to understand how things may develop, both good and both bad and indifferent, and come up with a plan on how we're going to deal with these different developments given any certain direction. I think that would make us very happy people in the end.
Sounds like good advice. Well, Brian, on behalf of Small Business USA and Network and Golf, thank you very much. And I think we have a plan to have you back sometime in the near future. So we look forward to it. Thanks again.
Yep. And thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure being on the show with you.
Okay, appreciate it. Bye-bye.